Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. I had some interesting things that I wanted to talk to you about. First, I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, I am totally rocking this jacket, so just take that into consideration. Number two, I want to call your attention to this amazing tapestry of awesomeness behind me here. You may not totally understand what all this stuff is, but I think as I go, I'll point out different pieces of it so you'll understand. My mother, bless her dear heart, went through a bunch of old t-shirts that I had when I was in high school and made a quilt out of them, right? Now, they've been well cleaned, so it's not like I've got high school germs hanging out in my apartment. But I did want to just point out one. You can only see kind of half of the first part here, but this is my GBC shirt. This represents the band that I was in high school. And we rocked people's faces with our epic couch rock. Anyway, that's what this says right here, couch rock, and here's the couch in between. So anyway, that has nothing to do with what I wanted to talk about today. I have been having this thought sort of burning within me, and I wanted to share both the thought and how I think it applies to all of us. So I think a lot of times when we take action, or when we judge the way that other people take action, because really the decisions we make about who we're going to be and how we're going to act are almost always based on relating ourselves and comparing ourselves to other people. And I went for a long time, I used to say, oh, that's terrible, you should never judge other people. And I think I've kind of changed my tune, read a little bit of Byron Katie, and now I realize that it's our job to judge. That's what we do, right? Humans judge. That's how things work. But I still think that there are productive ways to judge and there are unproductive ways to judge. So I would submit to you just a couple of things for your consideration. Let me put it that way. The first is, actions do not occur in a vacuum. What that means is, at least the way that I use that phrase, what that means is, when we take action or when we see somebody else take action, we're not actually seeing them make a choice. We're seeing the results of who they've become, right? So when you do something, it's the same with any action that you take. The actions that you take are not individual choices. They are the natural consequence of the person that you've become. Now, you become somebody, you become a type of person by making a bunch of small decisions. So what I would really have you consider here is that the choices that are made by people and by you that we tend to judge as being good or bad are actually neither. Because the choices that we make don't happen in that type of a vacuum, right? You don't just wake up one day and decide to abuse your spouse, right? That comes because of a whole series of choices and actions and circumstances that you've been put in, right? It's little choices that lead up to the choice of becoming or killing somebody, becoming a murderer. You don't just wake up one day, right? You don't just kill people, right? That is the consequence or the result of a bunch of small choices that have turned you into a person who is capable of taking those types of actions. Okay? So it's almost as though the individual choices we make aren't really up to us in the moment, but rather the choices that we will make in the future are up to us now. I think a lot of where this comes from is my personal beliefs on addiction, where addiction is not the absolute removal of free will, but rather it's the conditioning that makes it's the conditioning of the mind and of the brain and of the body that makes it that much more difficult to make the other choice. If you're addicted to tobacco, for example, we'll use a very benign example. If you're addicted to tobacco, it's not because you physically cannot choose not to smoke or chew tobacco. You're addicted because you have trained your brain that is the default option. That's what you go to. That's the person that you are. You are smoker, right? Or drinker. That's what you've conditioned yourself to be. So it takes a long time to break that down because you have to now literally make a new person, someone that doesn't do those things. And I think that's true of everything. I think that I personally am a little bit too nice about my definition of addiction. I think there are a lot more things included in addiction than we tend to say. In fact, that probably ties this whole thing together, right? Instead of thinking of our choices as individual, unique, siloed choices that we make without any other influence, if we think of them rather as addictions, and really go there. Think of the choices that you make as you are addicted to behaving in this certain way. Because you are. You don't actually have as much freedom as you think you do in the moment to make certain decisions. because so much else is going to influence that. Now, it might be easier, the levels of how difficult it's going to be for you to make those decisions will vary based on the unique circumstance. But at the end of the day, the choices that you make are not choices, they're consequences. Think about that. The actions that you take and the choices that you make are not actually choices, they're consequences. Okay? Now, the key is, and I think the way to tie this back in when it comes to judgment, some of those little actions that we take, the little choices that we make, will affect the big choices. And so when we normally try and change big things. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to stop lusting after, or whatever it is that we're going to do. I keep using religious Ten Commandment stuff. But anyway, I'm going to stop doing these big things. When really, I think what we should be doing is thinking of all the small things that make it impossible for us to really actually change that, and change those things. Change the small decisions. If you're a drinker and you want to stop drinking, you don't just do everything the same except for the drinking part. You don't go to the bar, sit down, order the drink, sit next to your buddies where they're all drinking, and then stop drinking, right? You just don't go to the bar. Or even better, you do something else. You fill it with something else, some other activity that you want to do. That's pretty obvious. I don't think anybody would argue with that. We've all seen that happen before, and that's part of the 12-step program, right? You replace the bad action with a good action. But it's the same thing in everything else. You can't actually think that you're just going to change some massively bad habit that you have unless you start with the things that lead you to that, right? Because that's really where the power is, and it's so subtle, and we forget. I know I do this all the time. We forget that really when we make the choice to do the bad thing, it's when we make the first choice that seems benign. If we don't want to drink, making the choice to drink is not where we made the mistake. The mistake is made when we decide to go to the bar, right? Because once we've made that choice, the rest of it is just habit. It's our addiction. It's just the way that we do things. So there's really the place where your actions are really, really defined, and the place where you're defined, and really when it comes to judgment, what we should be looking at is not the ultimate reaction, or not reaction, but the ultimate action. Not the consequence. Not the ultimate action, not the thing we see, but the little choices that lead up to it. Because if we can change those, we can change the course of our lives. All right? So, what I would have you consider is, instead of looking to what we see other people doing and judging our lives based on what we see them doing and what we can see ourselves doing, all of our judgments, to be practical and to be productive, should be based on, am I doing the same things that led that person to take the action that I don't like? Forget about the action. That doesn't matter. Am I doing the same things that led that person to take the action that I don't like? That's the thing to consider. And I think if we focus ourselves on those small decisions that lead up to the big decisions, we'll have much more success. Still rocking the coat? See you on the flip side.